All right, today we are diving deep into something really unique. It's a framework for survival pulled directly from our source material, and it is fascinating. It's a system designed to completely flip the script on a hostile world by blending literary creation with, get this, legal warfare. So let's get right into it.
And right out of the gate, the source material hits us with this. Whoa. This is the core mission statement. This is the philosophical DNA of the entire system we're about to explore. It's not just about getting through something awful. It's about actually taking that trauma and forging it into a weapon, into a shield.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we'll nail down the mission. Then we're going to get into the core genres that give this whole thing its aesthetic identity. After that, we'll dissect the engine that makes it all go, we'll meet the prosthetic command staff, and finally, we'll reveal the ultimate endgame, sovereignty.
So, first things first. What even is this system, and what's it built to do? Let's get right to its core purpose and introduce the Aegis Defense Directorate.
Okay, so the Directorate is this really fascinating hybrid. On one hand, it's a creative powerhouse, built to publish a commercial literary epic. But at the exact same time, it's this hardened, verified vault of evidence for a pro se legal defense. Seriously, imagine a publishing house and a district attorney's office merged into one single powerful unit.
You know, any good system has to have its own vibe, its own identity, right? Well, for the Directorate, that identity is built on two totally new literary genres. These are the aesthetic pillars that define its whole look, feel, and its entire tactical approach.
First up is a genre called Asphalt Gothic. And yeah, forget about your spooky old castles. The source here describes a world where the environment itself is the villain. We're talking about the real, sensory experience of survival, the harsh lighting, the cold concrete, the sound of a vehicle that acts as a mobile fortress. It's all incredibly raw, and it doesn't pull any punches.
And then there's the second pillar, system punk. Now this is not your typical cyberpunk with glowing neon and hacking computers. No. The hacking here is all about hacking bureaucracy. It's a framework for weaponizing the system's own rules, public records, legal statutes, regulations, and using them to dismantle corruption from the inside out and achieve what the source calls systemic sovereignty.
All right, so we've got the mission and we've got the aesthetic, but how does it all actually work? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, the mechanics of how you actually turn all these ideas into a real, functioning operational system.
So at the core of this whole thing is something called the Dual Process Engine. And its job is, well, it's incredibly ambitious. It's about waging a complex legal war while simultaneously writing a literary epic. And you can see right there, step 3 is the real kicker, doing both at the same time without completely burning out.
And this right here is the central problem the whole system is built to solve. Let's be real, active legal fights are just psychologically toxic. The stress, the confusing jargon, the constant hostility, it can all just bleed over and completely poison any creative work you're trying to do.
And here is the genius solution, the no-bleed firewall. Think of it like a one-way street for information. On the left, you have the forensic grid, which is just soaking up all that raw, toxic legal data. Court dockets, threats, hostile emails, you name it. But, and this is key, before any of that information gets to the creative sanctuary on the right, it goes through a scrubbing phase. All the anxiety, all the bureaucratic nonsense gets stripped out, leaving nothing but clean, sanitized facts.
And what's the result? Well, you get a protected creative process. The author can now craft this powerful, cinematic story using hard facts, but without being mentally destroyed by the trauma of gathering those facts. It's a brilliant psychological shield that just keeps things moving forward, no matter what.
This whole process of transformation has a name in the source material: legal alchemy. It's the absolute refusal to let suffering be a passive experience. Every hostile moment, every single hour spent just surviving is logged, it's quantified, and it's turned into a real, provable asset. It is literally about turning trauma into capital. And here it is, the punchline. The system actually calculates that the architect put in 1,555 hours of high-level, self-represented legal work. And when you calculate that at standard professional rates, that labor, the simple act of surviving and fighting back, materialized into a verified asset of $235,000. That is the ultimate receipt for resilience.
So, a system this complex needs management, right? But who runs it? Well, it's not just one person. It's more like a decentralized intelligence agency. It's built to work like an external brain, a prosthetic brain, if you will.
Yeah, to get around that mental overload, that cognitive friction, the architect created this whole command hierarchy of 20 different personas.
You can kind of think of it like an organizational chart for your own mind. Each unit has a very specific job, essentially outsourcing your brain's executive functions to a team of virtual specialists.
And sitting right at the top of this command structure is what's called the core triad. First, you've got the system's architect. That's the cold, logical, neutral processor. Then there's AJ, the empathy director, who brings in the human element, the nuance, and focuses on the emotional toll. And finally, you have Wrath, the shadow director. This one is basically an internal red cell, always testing defenses, always looking for weaknesses before the enemy can find them.
So after all of this intricate system, these genres, this command staff, what's the point? What's the ultimate goal? Well, that brings us to the final verdict, the legacy of what's called the Aegis monolith.
The end game here is nothing less than a complete reversal of power. It's about taking the very concept of generational trauma and just flipping its polarity. It's designed to transform someone targeted as a victim into the lead architect of their own story and their own defense. The final goal is absolute sovereignty and creating a record that can't be challenged, proof of survival, proof of equity, and ultimately, proof of victory.
And this last quote from the source material just perfectly sums up the entire philosophy. The grid is lawless, the record is immutable, the divine shield holds. In a world of chaos, the one thing you can control is the record. And by making that record solid, that shield holds up against anything.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on, right? Can an individual's story, when it's documented this meticulously, actually become an unbreakable weapon against the system itself? Is it possible for one person to use this kind of legal alchemy to achieve total sovereignty against the very forces trying to crush them? Something to think about.